At his own wedding, every guest watched the most feared mafia boss in New York sit alone in his wheelchair. His bride had vanished minutes before the vows. The cameras were still rolling. The rival families were smiling. His enemies believed they had finally broken him without firing a single bullet. Dante Romano did not move. He did not beg. He did not lower his head. But behind his cold eyes, humiliation burned deeper than pain. Then, from the back of the ballroom, a maid stepped forward in a simple black uniform. She looked at the abandoned groom and softly asked, "Shall we dance?" But why would a powerless maid risk everything for a mafia king everyone else had left behind? At his own wedding, every guest watched the most feared mafia boss in New York sit alone in his wheelchair. His bride had vanished minutes before the vows. The cameras were still rolling. The rival families were smiling. His enemies believed they had finally broken him without firing a single bullet. Dante Romano did not move. He did not beg. He did not lower his head. But behind his cold eyes, humiliation burned deeper than pain. Then, from the back of the ballroom, a maid stepped forward in a simple black uniform. She looked at the abandoned groom and softly asked, "Shall we dance?" But why would a powerless maid risk everything for a mafia king everyone else had left behind? The Romano wedding had been designed to look untouchable. Crystal chandeliers burned above the ballroom like frozen stars. White roses climbed gold pillars. A string orchestra played from a balcony guarded by men in black suits with guns hidden beneath their jackets. Every major crime family in New York had sent someone to watch. Some came to offer respect. Some came to measure weakness. Some came hoping to witness blood. They received something worse: humiliation. Dante Romano, the most feared mafia boss on the East Coast, sat at the center of the ballroom in a custom black wheelchair, dressed in a midnight tuxedo, his hands resting calmly on the armrests as if he were presiding over a funeral instead of waiting for his bride. His face revealed nothing. Not anger, not embarrassment, not pain. That was what made the silence terrifying. Dante had once been the kind of man people stepped aside for before he even entered a room. Tall, ruthless, brilliant, and dangerously controlled. He had inherited the Romano Empire after his father's assassination and expanded it with the precision of a military campaign. Ports, casinos, construction firms, private security companies, political favors, offshore accounts. Dante held the city's throat without ever needing to squeeze too hard. Then came the ambush. 6 months before the wedding, a bomb exploded beneath his armored car on a rainy night outside Brooklyn Harbor. The blast killed 2 of his guards, burned half the street, and left Dante alive in the cruelest possible way. His spine was damaged. His legs stopped obeying him. The world that had once trembled beneath his footsteps now watched him move through it on wheels. His enemies called it justice. His allies called it tragedy. Dante called it information, because the bomb had not been random. It had been placed by someone who knew his private route, his security rotation, and the exact 5-minute window when his convoy would separate near the harbor bridge. Someone inside the Romano world had betrayed him, but Dante did not accuse without proof. He healed in silence. He returned to business in silence. He let men look at his wheelchair and think they understood what had changed. They did not. Only his legs had failed. Not his mind. Not his reach. Not his memory. Still, the empire had begun to shift beneath him. Men who once feared his shadow now tested his patience. Old allies delayed payments. Younger captains whispered that a boss who could not stand could not rule forever. Rival families sent gifts with meanings hidden inside them: walking canes, silver shoes, invitations to hunting trips. Dante accepted every insult without reaction. Then he announced his wedding. The bride was Valentina De Luca, daughter of a powerful allied family from Chicago. The marriage was supposed to stabilize the Romano Empire, silence doubts, and unite 2 bloodlines strong enough to crush any rebellion before it grew teeth. Valentina was beautiful, educated, polished, and trained since childhood to sit beside dangerous men without flinching. She had smiled beside Dante during the engagement photographs. She had placed her hand gently on his shoulder in public. She had told reporters that strength was not measured by legs. The city believed the performance. Dante did not. He had seen too much calculation in her eyes, too much distance in her touch. He knew Valentina did not love him. That did not offend him. Love had never been part of the arrangement, marriage, in their world was not romance. It was architecture. Families built alliances with rings the way armies built walls with stone. But even architecture could collapse if the foundation was rotten. And on the wedding day, Valentina vanished. Not kidnapped, not killed, gone. Her room was empty. Her dress remained hanging by the mirror. Her jewelry was gone. Her private guards were gone. Her father's men had quietly moved to the edges of the ballroom, where they watched Dante with expressions too controlled to be innocent. Then a video arrived. Every phone in the ballroom received it at the same time. Valentina appeared on screen wearing a red dress instead of white, sitting beside Dante's rival, Adrian Volkov. Her engagement ring lay on a table between them. She did not look afraid. She looked relieved. Then she spoke the words designed to cut deeper than any bullet. She said she would not marry half a man. The ballroom stopped breathing. In that single moment, the Romano Empire shook, not because Dante's heart had broken, because his image had been attacked in front of every predator who had been waiting to see whether the wounded lion still had teeth. Valentina had not simply abandoned him. She had staged his public destruction. The orchestra died mid-note. Cameras kept recording. Guests whispered behind jeweled hands. Rival envoys exchanged glances. Even some Romano captains looked toward the exit, calculating whether history had just turned. Dante sat still. His jaw did not tighten. His hands did not shake. His eyes remained fixed on the empty aisle where his bride should have walked. But inside him, something old and merciless opened its eyes. He could order Valentina killed. He could burn the De Luca family before midnight. He could send men to drag Adrian Volkov out by his tongue and make the city remember what happened when anyone mocked a Romano. But violence at that moment would look like wounded pride. And wounded pride was weakness. Dante needed control. He needed the room to remember fear. He needed the wedding not to end with him abandoned. That was when the maid stepped forward. Her name was Elena Marlowe. No one noticed her until she moved. She had spent the evening carrying champagne between tables, lowering her gaze when powerful men looked through her, cleaning spilled wine from marble without being thanked. She was 24, slim, quiet, and dressed in the black uniform of temporary service staff hired for the event. In a room full of diamonds and bloodlines, she looked like someone life had trained to become invisible. But invisibility had its own kind of power. Elena had heard everything. The whispers about Dante's wheelchair, the jokes from drunk cousins, the pity disguised as respect, the ugly little laugh from a Volkov representative when Valentina's video played. She had seen Dante sitting alone beneath the chandeliers while the world waited for him to crack. And something in her refused to let that be the final image. Not because she loved him. She did not know him. Not because she understood Mafia politics. She understood only enough to know that powerful people could be cruelest when they believed no one beneath them mattered. Elena knew humiliation. She knew what it felt like to be abandoned in public. She knew what it felt like to become a story other people enjoyed telling. Years before, her father had been a driver for the Romano family. He had died in what the newspapers called an accident near the docks. Her mother lost the apartment after that. Elena left school, took cleaning jobs, served at private parties, and learned how rich people looked when they thought servants were furniture. But her father had once told her something about Dante Romano. He had said Dante was dangerous, yes, but not careless, cold, but not filthy. He had rules. In their world, rules were the thin line between criminals and animals. So when Elena saw him abandoned beneath 1,000 watching eyes, she did not see a mafia king. She saw a man being turned into a spectacle. And she stepped into the aisle. The movement was small at first, a maid leaving her position with an empty tray in her hands. Then she placed the tray on a table. That sound, silver touching glass, traveled through the ballroom like a bell. People turned. Elena walked toward Dante slowly, her heart beating so hard she could feel it in her throat. Every step felt like crossing a battlefield. Guards watched her. Guests stared. A De Luca cousin smirked as if the night had finally become entertainment. Dante looked at her only when she stopped in front of him. Up close, he was more frightening than she expected. Not because of the wheelchair, because of the stillness. His eyes were dark and intelligent, stripped of any softness that might invite pity. Elena felt instantly that he missed nothing. Not her worn shoes, not her shaking fingers, not the fact that she was terrified and stepping forward anyway. For a second, She almost lost her courage. Then she remembered Valentina's words. Half a man. Elena had heard cruelty before, but that phrase had carried a poison meant for everyone in the room. It had told every enemy that Dante's body made him less. It had told every disabled person watching from the margins of life that power, dignity, and desire belonged only to bodies the world approved. Elena could not undo the insult, but she could refuse to let it stand alone. She held out her hand. The room went colder. Then she softly asked him if he would dance. The silence that followed was violent. A maid had spoken to a mafia boss in front of 5 crime families. A servant had offered what a bride had stolen. A powerless woman had stepped into the center of a public execution and interrupted the blade. Dante stared at her hand. He could destroy her for embarrassing him further. He could order her removed. He could ignore her and let the room swallow her alive. Instead, he studied her face. There was fear there, but no mockery, no pity, no greed. She was not smiling for cameras. She was not trying to become famous in his humiliation. Her hand trembled, but she did not withdraw it. That detail reached him. Not emotionally, not yet, strategically, because courage without an audience was rare. Courage from someone with nothing to gain was rarer. Dante placed his hand in hers. A ripple of shock moved through the ballroom. Elena's breath caught. Dante's grip was warm, controlled, and stronger than she expected. He did not pull himself up. He could not. Instead, he gave a small nod to the orchestra. No one moved. Dante turned his eyes toward the balcony. The conductor immediately raised his bow. Music returned. Slow, dark, elegant. Elena stepped closer, unsure how to dance a man in a wheelchair before hundreds of people trained to laugh at weakness. But Dante guided the moment with the smallest movement of his hand. His chair turned smoothly across the marble floor, custom-built, silent, precise. Elena moved with him, one hand in his, the other resting lightly near his shoulder without touching too much. At first, the dance looked impossible. Then it became mesmerizing. Dante controlled the chair like an extension of his body, turning through the ballroom with lethal grace. Elena followed carefully, then more naturally, her black uniform moving against the light like a shadow beside a king. The contrast should have looked absurd. The abandoned mafia boss and the maid who had saved his wedding from becoming a funeral for his reputation. Instead, it silenced the room. Camera flashes began again, but this time they captured something Valentina had not predicted. Dante Romano had not been left alone. Someone had chosen to stand with him. Not a bride from a powerful family. Not a woman bought by alliance. A maid. And somehow that made the image more dangerous. Because every man watching understood that power did not always come from bloodlines. Sometimes it came from controlling the moment everyone expected to destroy you. Dante's eyes never left Elena's face. She tried to look calm, but he could feel the tremor in her hand. She had risked her job, perhaps her life, to give him dignity in a room designed to strip it from him. He wondered who she was, who had hired her, whether this was another trap, because Dante trusted nothing beautiful that arrived at the perfect time. And Elena's courage was beautiful in a way he did not like. It made him curious. Curiosity, for Dante, was dangerous. As the dance ended, the room did not clap at first. No one knew if applause was permitted. Then Enzo Romano, Dante's younger brother and loyal underboss, began clapping from the front table. One by one, Romano men followed. Then the guests, then even the rivals, forced to pretend admiration for the very recovery they had hoped would fail. Dante released Elena's hand, but did not dismiss her. He turned to the crowd and spoke for the first time since Valentina's disappearance. His voice was calm, carrying across the ballroom without effort. He announced that the wedding celebration would continue. No bride, no explanation, no visible wound. Just command. Then he ordered the doors closed. The guests understood immediately. No one would leave until Dante decided what tonight had become. Elena stepped back, hoping to disappear into the staff line before she regretted every breath she had taken in the last 5 minutes. But Dante looked at Enzo and gave a quiet instruction. Find out who she is. Elena did not hear it. She was already walking away, heart still racing, unaware that the most dangerous man in New York had just placed a name inside his attention. Across the ballroom, Adrian Volkov's envoy watched with narrowed eyes. The plan had been simple. Humiliate Dante, weaken the Romanos, trigger doubt, and make Valentina's betrayal the first crack in a larger coup. But the maid had changed the picture. Now the abandoned groom looked wounded but unbroken. The maid had become a symbol, and symbols were dangerous. By midnight, Elena Marlowe was no longer invisible. She was a problem, and in the Mafia world, problems were either bought, used, or removed. The Romano estate had been built to survive war. High walls surrounded the property. Cameras watched every gate. Armed men guarded every corridor, every balcony, every service tunnel beneath the gardens. To ordinary guests, it looked like a mansion dress for a wedding. To anyone who understood power, it was a fortress wearing flowers. But fortresses did not fall because walls were weak. They fell because someone inside opened the gate. From the library window, Dante watched headlights cut through the rain below. 3 black SUVs had entered through the East Service Road, the one used by caterers and maintenance staff. It should have been locked after midnight. It should have required 2 codes, 1 biometric scan, and authorization from the security room. Yet the vehicles moved through it as if invited. Rocco Bellini had not come as an invader. He had come as a man reclaiming a house he believed already belonged to him. Gunfire cracked near the Rose Garden. Guests screamed somewhere downstairs. The ballroom orchestra, which had played through humiliation, finally collapsed into chaos. Chairs overturned. Glass broke. Men shouted orders that contradicted other orders. The estate's internal radios hissed with panic until Dante reached for the receiver on the library desk. His voice entered the system once. Calm. Absolute. And the panic died. He ordered loyal units to seal the guest wing, move civilians into the wine cellar, isolate the Luca men, and cut the east corridor from the main hall. He sent 2 teams to the security room, 1 to the garage, 1 to the old chapel entrance. He did not raise his voice once. He did not repeat himself. He did not sound like a man trapped in a wheelchair while traitors stormed his house. He sounded like the house itself had begun giving commands. Elena stood beside him with a silver letter opener clenched in her hand. She had never been inside violence like this. Not real violence. Not the kind that made walls vibrate and men run toward gunfire instead of away from it. Her whole body wanted to freeze, but her mind kept returning to her apartment door standing open, her father's watch held by a stranger, the message calling Dante a cripple as if cruelty itself were proof of power. Fear moved through her, but so did fury. For 8 years, she had mourned a lie. She had worked double shifts, buried her mother, sold pieces of her life, and believed her father had simply vanished beneath bad luck in river water. Now his death stood in the room with him, wearing Rocco Bellini's name. Dante turned his chair from the window. He saw the letter opener. He saw her white knuckles. He said she was not trained for this. Elena looked at the old photograph of her father on the desk. Then she looked back at Dante. She said neither was her father when they killed him. The words landed between them like a match in spilled gasoline. For the first time, Dante did not answer, because there was no answer clean enough. Enzo returned to the library with 4 loyal guards, rain on his shoulders and blood on his sleeve. He had not been shot, only cut by glass, but his face carried bad news before he spoke. Rocco's men had taken the lower east hall. 2 internal security teams had switched sides. The camera room was compromised. Several DeLuca guests were missing from the cellar transfer. And worse, someone had released the emergency locks on the private elevator. The elevator that led directly to the 2nd floor, directly toward the library. Dante's eyes moved toward the double doors. The estate had always been full of secret passages, private routes, old escape systems built by paranoid men who believed betrayal was not a possibility but a schedule. Dante knew most of them. Rocco knew the rest. That was when the lights flickered again. Not out completely, just enough to make every shadow blink. A voice came through the mansion intercom. Rocco Bellini, smooth, roughened by age, confident in the way only traitors sound when they believe the winning side has finally become visible. He apologized to the guests for the inconvenience. He said the Romano family was undergoing an internal correction. He said no loyal friend of the city would be harmed if they remained calm. Then his voice sharpened slightly as he addressed Dante directly. He called him a brilliant boy, a wounded boy, a boy who had mistaken survival for authority. Elena watched Dante's face. Nothing moved, but the air changed. Rocco continued. He said the bombing had been a mercy compared to what the city would become under a boss who could no longer inspire fear with his presence. He said the wedding had proved what captains had whispered for months. Power could not sit forever and expect men to kneel. Then he laughed softly and said the maid had been a beautiful interruption. But interruptions ended. The intercom went dead. Elena's stomach turned. Dante looked at Enzo. One nod. Enzo understood immediately. He sent 2 guards to barricade the main doors and moved the others toward the side passage behind the bookshelves. Dante rolled to the desk, opened a lower drawer, and removed a compact black pistol. Elena stared before she could stop herself. He noticed. Dante said the chair had storage compartments too. Under any other circumstance, it might have sounded almost dry. Tonight, it sounded like a warning to everyone who had underestimated him. Then the elevator bell rang. Soft, elegant, absurdly polite. Every gun in the library turned toward the private elevator door hidden behind the far wall panel. No one breathed. The doors opened. Empty. For one fraction of a second, the room remained still. Then smoke rolled out across the floor. Not fire smoke. Tactical smoke. Thick and white. Swallowing the carpet, the lower shelves, the legs of chairs. The guards fired first, but they were shooting at shadows. Bullets cracked into wood and plaster. The library became a storm of noise and splinters. Elena dropped behind the desk as Dante's chair moved with shocking speed, not backward in retreat, but sideways into cover. Men came through the smoke, not in a rush, in formation, Romano uniforms. Rocco's soldiers wearing the same black suits as the men loyal to Dante. That was a true horror betrayal. In the smoke, everyone looked like family. Enzo fired twice and took down the first attacker. Dante fired once from the low angle of his chair, precise and cold. Another man fell against the bookshelves. The guards near the door returned fire, but confusion spread fast. Someone shouted a name. Someone else shouted not to shoot. A loyal guard hesitated half a second too long when he recognized a cousin among the attackers. That hesitation killed him. Elena saw him fall. Not dramatically, not like films. One moment alive, the next gone from the room's future. Her hand tightened around the letter opener. An attacker moved around the desk, weapon raised toward Dante's side. He had chosen his path well, using the smoke and the chair's low position to angle behind him. Dante was focused on the elevator. Enzo was reloading. No one else saw. Elena moved before thought could stop her. She did not stab like a trained fighter. She slammed the heavy letter opener into the man's hand with both of his, striking bone and metal. His gun clattered to the floor. He turned on her with a snarl, backhanding her so hard she hit the side of the desk, and saw light burst behind her eyes. Dante heard the impact. The attacker reached for Elena's throat. Dante shot him through the shoulder. The man spun and collapsed into the smoke, screaming. Elena slid to the floor, gasping, cheek burning, but alive. Dante was beside her faster than she expected, his chair cutting through the smoke like a blade. He asked if she was hit. She shook her head. Her ears rang. Her face throbbed. Her hands would not stop shaking. But she looked at the fallen gun near the desk, then at the attacker who had almost reached Dante. She had saved him. Not completely, not gracefully, but enough. Dante saw that realization form in her eyes. And something in his expression changed. Until then, Elena had been a question, a witness, a possible key to an old betrayal, a woman who had stepped forward at the wedding and disrupted the narrative his enemies wanted. Now she had bled for the answer. The library doors exploded inward. Rocco had arrived. He did not enter alone. 6 men came with him, all Romano captains or senior guards, men who had once eaten at Dante's table, sworn loyalty to his father, kissed his mother's hand at family ceremonies. Their weapons were drawn, but their eyes were not wild. They believed this was not an attack. They believed it was succession. Rocco Bellini stepped through the smoke in a charcoal chute, silver scars shining along his jaw, rainwater darkening his shoulders. He looked at the ruined library, the fallen men, the smoke drifting through old books, and smiled with the sadness of a man pretending he regretted what ambition required. His eyes found Elena. Recognition passed across his face. Not surprise, annoyance, as if the past had left a stain on his clean plan. He said she looked like her mother. Elena's entire body went cold. Dante's gun shifted slightly toward Rocco. Rocco raised one hand, not afraid, only amused. He said killing him now would not restore the estate, the captains, the alliance, or Dante's image. The families were already being informed that the Romano boss had suffered a violent psychological break after being abandoned at the altar. Guests had seen enough chaos to believe it. De Luca witnesses would confirm instability. Volkov channels would amplify it. By morning, the city would not ask who betrayed Dante, ask whether he had finally become unfit to rule. Dante said nothing. Rocco looked at the wheelchair. Then he made the mistake every enemy had made that night. He thought cruelty was strategy. He told Dante that his father would have hidden him after the accident, not paraded him through weddings and business meetings like a monument to survival. He said bosses were not meant to be admired for endurance. They were meant to be feared for dominance. Men did not follow pain. They followed certainty. And every time Dante entered a room in that chair, he reminded them that even kings could be broken. Elena expected Dante to flinch. He did not. But she did. Not from insult. From rage. Rocco saw it and smiled. He turned toward her fully. He said Elena's father had made the same mistake. Thomas Marlowe had been a driver who thought loyalty made him important. He saw a meeting near the docks he should not have seen. He heard names he should not have remembered. And then he did something unforgivably common. He called the house. Elena's breath stopped. The 43-second call. Rocco's voice softened with cruelty. He said Thomas had tried to warn Dante's father that dockmen were moving product for Volkov under Romano colors. He said Thomas had named Rocco. He said he had begged for protection for his wife and daughter. Dante's hand tightened around his gun. Rocco continued, almost lazily now, because confession in a room he controlled felt like victory. He said Dante's father had been old school enough to value loyalty, but arrogant enough to believe he could handle the matter quietly. He sent men too late. By then, Thomas was already in the trunk of his own car, and the car was already on its way to the river. Elena did not move. Something inside her cracked, but it did not break outward. It broke inward, deep and silent. For years, she had imagined her father's final moments as an accident. Panic, water, darkness. Now she saw something worse. Betrayal, fear, the knowledge that he had tried to protect his family and had failed only because powerful men moved too slowly or too corruptly to save him. Rocco said he paid for the funeral because he was not without manners. Elena's face changed. The sentence was so obscene in its elegance that even some of Rocco's men looked away. Dante saw it. A crack. Not large. Enough. Dante finally spoke. He asked Rocco if the bombing was his. Rocco looked back at him. For the first time, the old captain's smile faded. Then he admitted it. Not directly at first. He said the car bomb had been designed to kill Dante. Yes, but survival had created a better opportunity. A dead boss became a martyr. A wounded boss became a question. Questions weakened loyalty far more efficiently than graves. He had let Dante live. Not out of mercy. Out of usefulness. Elena looked at Dante then and saw the full weight of the night settle over him. The abandoned bride, the public insult, the estate attack, the bomb, her father's murder. All of it was one long chain, years in the making, built by a man who had lived inside the Romano house like a trusted pillar while secretly hollowing it from within. Rocco offered Dante one final arrangement. Step down publicly. Blame the attack on Volkov extremists and De Luca panic. Retire with dignity. Keep the chair, the money, the private wing, the doctors, the pretty maid if he wanted her. At that, Dante's eyes turned lethal. Rocco should not have said it. Everyone in the room felt that. Even Elena. Especially Elena. For the first time, Dante's anger was not about the insult to himself. He had endured those all night with terrifying discipline. This was different. Rocco had reduced Elena again, to a thing to be kept, a prize beside furniture, a powerless woman folded into a bargain between men. Dante rolled forward slightly. One of Rocco's guards raised his weapon. Enzo raised his faster. The room balanced on a breath. Dante told Rocco that he had misunderstood the chair. Rocco's brow shifted. Dante continued, voice low enough that everyone had to listen harder. He said men like Rocco saw the chair and thought it represented loss. Legs lost. Dominance lost. Fear lost. But the chair had given Dante something his enemies never expected. Stillness. While they watched his body, he watched their faces. While they mocked his movement, he mapped their impatience. While they waited for him to become ashamed, he learned exactly who believed power lived in posture instead of command. Then Dante's gaze moved, not to Rocco, but to the captains behind him. He said every man in the room had made his choice, and every choice had been recorded. Rocco's smile returned too quickly. He said the security room was his. Dante said he knew. That was why he had never used the security room. The fire alarm suddenly screamed. Not the emergency alarm from the estate system. A separate pitch. Older, lower, coming from inside the walls. Rocco's expression changed. Dante looked toward the fireplace. A small red light blinked inside the carved marble crest above it. The old Romano system, built by Dante's grandfather before digital security, before biometric gates, before captains learned to trust screens more than stone. A panic system known only to the bloodline and 2 dead architects. It did not record to the security room. It recorded to a sealed server beneath the chapel and broadcast only when manually triggered. Dante had triggered at the moment Rocco entered the library. Every confession had gone out live, not to the police, not to the media, to every Romano captain, every allied family elder, every offshore account controller, every judge on the payroll, every DeLuca elder still pretending shock downstairs, and every Volkov intermediary listening for weakness. Rocco had not staged a coup. He had testified at his own execution. The room changed instantly. The captains behind Rocco shifted. Some raised their weapons slightly, not toward Dante now, but away from him. Men who had followed Rocco because they believed he was winning suddenly understood the old rule of power. Betrayal was forgivable only when successful. Failure made traitors expensive to stand near. Rocco realized it too. His eyes moved to the door, then the elevator, then Elena. The past and present aligned in a single ugly calculation. He lunged toward her. Not Dante. Elena, because she was the one loose end he had failed to bury twice. Dante fired, but one of Rocco's men shoved his chair from the side, throwing off the shot. The bullet struck the wall. Enzo tackled the man, and the library erupted again. Rocco grabbed Elena by the arm and dragged her toward the side passage behind the shelves. She fought instantly, slamming the letter opener toward his face. He caught her wrist and twisted until pain flashed white through her vision. The weapon fell. He pulled her through the hidden doors, gunfire and shouting swallowed the library behind them. The passage was narrow and dark. Old stone walls. Dust. Emergency lamps glowing faintly along the floor. Elena stumbled, but Rocco kept dragging her. He was stronger than he looked, fueled by panic now. The careful traitor was gone. In his place was a man who had put her father in a car and sent him into the river. He told her she should have stayed invisible. The words cut through her fear. Invisible. That had been her life. Invisible in restaurants. Invisible in hospital offices. Invisible at rich parties. Invisible when her mother cried over bills. Invisible when her father's death became paperwork. Invisible until she stepped into a ballroom and offered a humiliated man her hand. Elena stopped trying to pull away. For half a second, she let her body go heavy. Rocco cursed and shifted his grip. That was all she needed. She drove her heel down onto his foot, twisted her injured wrist free, and slammed her shoulder into him with every ounce of strength she had. He staggered against the wall. Elena ran. The passage opened into the old chapel balcony above the ballroom. Below, wedding guests were huddled under guard, the white flowers now trampled, the aisle scattered with broken glass. The altar still stood at the front, waiting for vows that had never happened. Elena ran along the balcony rail, but Rocco caught her hair and yanked her back. Pain tore across her scalp. She cried out. Below, heads turned. Dante heard her. He emerged from the side corridor at the chapel floor, moving his chair fast, Enzo and loyal guard behind him. Blood marked his temple where the earlier impact had thrown him against the armrest, but his eyes were fixed upward. Elena stood on the balcony with Rocco's arm locked around her throat. The scene became a cool reflection of the wedding. Again, a room full of powerful people watched. Again, Dante sat below while someone tried to turn his body into helplessness. Again, Elena stood between humiliation and violence. But this time, Rocco had a gun pressed to her side. He shouted for Dante to stop. The chapel froze. Rocco's voice echoed beneath the vaulted ceiling. He said the broadcast meant nothing if Dante died in front of witnesses. He said the families would still fracture, the empire would still bleed, the city would still choose a boss who could stand over one who could not. Dante looked up at him. Then he did something no one expected. He locked the wheels of his chair, placed both hands on the armrests, and began to rise. The room stopped breathing. It was not graceful. It was not easy. It was pain made visible. His body shook with the effort. His arms trembled. His jaw clenched so hard the muscles in his face looked carved from stone. For 6 months, the world had debated what Dante Romano could no longer do. For 6 months, enemies had built an entire rebellion around the image of him seated. Now he forced himself upward, not because standing made him more of a man, but because Rocco had built his lie around the belief that Dante was ashamed of not standing. Dante would not let shame speak for him. He rose only halfway, enough to make the room gasp, enough to make Rocco's eyes widen, enough for every guest, ally, rival, and traitor to see that the wheelchair had never been the source of Dante's power. Then Dante spoke. He said a man who needed another person's humiliation to prove his strength had already confessed his weakness. His arms nearly gave out, but he held himself there. He said Rocco had murdered a loyal driver, bombed his own boss, sold the docks to Volkov, and used a woman's public cruelty as a weapon because he could not win in the open. Then Dante looked at the men below. Every captain heard the judgment. Every guest understood the reversal. Dante did not ask for loyalty. He made disloyalty look small. That was when Elena moved. She had felt Rocco's attention shift toward Dante, just for a breath. His grip loosened enough for anger to become action. She slammed the back of her head into his face. Pain burst through her skull, but Rocco's gun arm jerked away from her ribs. A shot fired. The bullet struck the chandelier chain above the aisle. Crystals exploded downward like ice. Guests screamed. Elena twisted free, but Rocco grabbed the back of her uniform and pulled her toward the balcony edge. For one terrible second, she was falling backward into open air. Dante saw it. The whole room saw it. Elena's hand caught the railing at the last moment. Her body swung over the chapel floor. Rocco tried to pry her fingers loose. Dante moved, not with legs, with command. He dropped back into his chair, unlocked the wheels, and drove forward as Enzo fired toward the balcony. The shot hit near Rocco's shoulder, forcing him back. Loyal guards surged up the side stairs. But Rocco, cornered now, chose one final cruelty. He kicked Elena's hand point, one finger slipped. Then another. Dante shouted her name. Not as an order, not as a warning, as terror. Elena looked down. Their eyes met across the distance between balcony and floor. For a second, she was back in the ballroom, hand extended, asking a broken-looking king to dance. Only now he was the one reaching for her. Dante positioned his chair beneath the balcony, but the height was too great. Enzo was still on the stairs, second away and too far. Elena's grip failed. She fell. Dante caught her. The impact nearly threw him backward. Pain ripped through his body so violently his vision flashed white, but his arms closed around her and did not let go. The chair skidded across the marble, struck the altar step, and stopped hard enough to crack with beneath one wheel. Elena collapsed against him, stunned, breathing, alive. Dante's face was inches from hers. For a moment, the entire chapel disappeared. He had caught her with the same arms the world said were not enough. He had saved her without standing, without pretending to be what he had been before the bomb, without becoming the image his enemies demanded. Elena looked at him and understood before he did. This was a turning point. Not because Dante had risen, because he had not needed to. Rocco reached the balcony stairs, trying to escape through the upper corridor. He did not make it. Enzo met him at the top. The fight was brief and brutal. Rocco fired once. Enzo ducked, drove him against the stone wall, and disarmed him with a twist that sent the gun spinning down the steps. Rocco tried to run, but two loyal guards caught him from behind and forced him to his knees at the chapel rail. Below, Dante still held Elena. Slowly, he released her enough to make sure she was not badly hurt. His hands were steady now, but his eyes were not. The fear he had shown when she fell had stripped something from him in front of the entire room. Everyone had seen it. The cold Mafia boss cared whether the Maid lived. In his world, that should have been dangerous. Tonight, it became something else. Human. Dante turned his chair toward the balcony. Rocco was dragged down the stairs and thrown onto the marble aisle where Valentina should have walked hours earlier. His scarred face was bruised. His suit was torn. His authority had vanished. Without the illusion of inevitability, he looked exactly like what he was, an old traitor surrounded by men who no longer wanted to be found standing near him. Dante looked at Elena. He did not ask permission with words, but she understood the pause. This was her father's murderer. Her truth. Her wound. She stood slowly, one hand on Dante's chair for balance. Every eye in the chapel followed her. The maid who had been ignored by the room at sunset now walked down the aisle at dawn while Mafia elders, rival families, and traitors watched in silence. She stopped in front of Rocco. For years, she had imagined what she would say if she ever met the person responsible for her father's death. In her imagination, the words were powerful, perfect, sharp enough to wound. But real grief was not poetic. It was tired. It was a daughter looking at a murderer and realizing nothing he suffered would bring back the man who used to carry her asleep from a car to her bed. Rocco looked up at her and tried one final manipulation. He said her father had been loyal to the wrong man. Elena bent down and picked up the silver letter opener she had dropped earlier. A guard had recovered it from the balcony passage. It was scratched now, bent slightly at the tip. For one moment, the room believed she might kill him. Dante watched without interfering. He would have let her choose. That was what made the moment different from every other act of power in that house. No one forced her mercy. No one demanded revenge. Elena held the blade near Rocco's face. Then she lowered it. She said her father died because men like Rocco thought loyalty was foolish when it belonged to someone poor. Her voice did not shake. She said Thomas Marlowe had been a better man as a driver than Rocco had ever been as a captain. That wounded Rocco more deeply than the blade would have, because the room heard it. The families heard it. The captains heard it. A maid had judged him, and no one laughed. Dante gave the order. Rocco Bellini was stripped of rank in front of everyone. His accounts were frozen. His properties seized. His men detained. His confession, already broadcast, was sent beyond the Mafia network to federal investigators connected to families Rocco had betrayed financially. Dante did not hand him over because he trusted the law. He handed him over because prison could reach places a private execution could not. Headlines, court records, historical truth. Thomas Marlowe's death would be reopened. The bombing would be tied to Rocco. The dock corruption would be exposed. And every man who had mocked Dante's wheelchair would have to watch the supposedly broken boss destroy a coup without leaving his chair. Rocco was dragged out of the chapel screaming that Dante was weak. No one believed him anymore. Outside, dawn began to touch the estate windows. Pale light entered the chapel, softening the wreckage of the wedding. Broken crystal glittered across the aisle. White roses lay crushed beneath footprints. The altar cloth was torn. The air smelled of smoke, rain, and candle wax. Elena stood among the ruins, suddenly exhausted. Her cheek was swollen. Her wrist throbbed. Her uniform was ripped at the shoulder. Her father's photograph was still upstairs in the library, lying on Dante's desk beside old files that had finally learned to speak. Dante approached her. For once, he did not look like a distant king. He looked like a man who had survived the night and paid for every minute of it. He thanked her. 2 simple words. No performance. No audience command. Just truth. Elena looked at him, and the image of him alone at the wedding returned to her. The empty aisle. The laughing enemies. Her own hand extended before she understood the cost. She told him she had only asked him to dance. Dante looked around the destroyed chapel, at the captured traitors, the shattered alliance, the dawn crawling over a wedding that had turned into a war. Then his eyes returned to Hayes. He said she had done more than that. She had changed who was watching. For a long moment, neither moved. Around them, the Romano Empire reorganized itself in silence. Men chose sides too late. The Lucca elders begged for distance from Valentina's betrayal. Vocal channels went dark. Enzo directed cleanup with lethal efficiency. The guests who had arrived to witness a marriage left knowing they had witnessed a throne defend itself. Elena should have felt relief. Instead, she felt the delayed weight of the night strike her all at once. Her knees weakened. Dante reached for her hand before she fell. This time, she did not offer it for a dance. She took his because she needed something solid. He held her carefully, not like property, not like a symbol, but like a person whose courage had cost too much. Then the chapel doors opened. A guard entered quickly, face tense. The entire room turned. He carried a tablet in both hands and gave it to Enzo, who looked at the screen once before his expression hardened. Enzo brought it to Dante. Elena saw the image before anyone could hide it. Valentina De Luca, still in the red dress from the video, but no longer smiling beside Adrian Volkov. She was tied to a chair in an unknown room, makeup streaked, eyes wide with terror. A fresh message appeared beneath the live feed. Rocco failed. The maid is next. Then a second line appeared, and Dante Romano will watch her dance in blood. The chapel went silent again. Dante's hand tightened around Elena's. The wedding betrayal was over. The real war had just introduced itself. The message stayed on the screen like a wound that refused to close. Rocco failed. The maid is next, and Dante Romano will watch her dance in blood. No one in the chapel spoke. Not the guests who had spent the night pretending not to be afraid. Not the De Luca elders whose daughter had vanished from betrayal into captivity. Not the Romano captains who had just watched Rocco Bellini's coup collapse in front of them. Even the guards seemed frozen, their weapons lowered by half an inch, their minds trying to understand how one night could keep opening into deeper darkness. Elena stared at the image of Valentina tied to the chair. The woman who had humiliated Dante. The woman who had called him half a man. The woman whose public betrayal had turned the wedding into a battlefield. And yet, looking at Valentina now, Elena did not feel triumph. Fear stripped people of their theater. On the screen, Valentina De Luca was no longer the perfect mafia bride in a red dress, no longer the elegant weapon chosen to shame a wounded king. She was a terrified woman staring at something beyond the camera, learning too late that people who use betrayal as a ladder often become the next step beneath someone else's shoe. Dante took the tablet from Enzo. His face revealed nothing. But Elena felt his hand still holding hers, and she felt the change in his grip. Not panic, not hesitation. Calculation moving beneath skin and bone. Enzo leaned closer and said the feed was bouncing through several encrypted channels. Volkov architecture, but not Adrian's usual signature. The room was unknown. No visible windows. Concrete wall. Industrial lighting. Could be a dock facility. Could be a basement. Could be anywhere. Dante studied the image. He did not look at Valentina's face first. He looked at the chair bolts, the floor stain, the angle of the light, the sound beneath the feed. A low hum, mechanical and steady. The kind of sound other people miss because fear was louder. Then he looked at Elena. The threat had named her. Not Dante's empire. Not his captains. Not his money. A maid who had begun the night serving champagne and ended it standing in the wreckage of a mafia coup with a dead father's truth finally rising from the river. Dante released her hand slowly. That hurt more than Elena expected. Not because she wanted to be held by him. Not exactly. But because the release felt like a door closing. Dante turned to Enzo and ordered Elena move to the secure wing. Elena's face hardened instantly. There it was again. Protection becoming a cage. Dante saw the change before she spoke, but this time he did not wait for the fight to become public. He moved closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. He said Volkov had threatened her by name. That meant they knew where she lived, knew who she was, knew her connection to Thomas Marlowe, and knew the symbolic value she had taken on after the dance. If they reached her now, they would not simply kill her. They would use her. Elena said she understood that. Dante said understanding did not make bullets polite. She looked at him, exhausted, bruised, furious, and still standing. She said her father had died because powerful men decided what he was allowed to know, where he was allowed to go, and when he was allowed to be protected. If Dante thought she would let another room full of men choose her place in this war while her name was written on the threat, then he had misunderstood the woman who asked him to dance. The words struck harder because she did not shout. Dante stared at her. The chapel around them watched. It was the first real test of the thing forming between them. Not attraction, not gratitude, not the emotional confusion of surviving violence together. Something more dangerous, respect demanding proof. Dante could have overruled her. Everyone knew it. One order, and guards would carry her out whether she hated him for it or not. That would be easy, familiar, the old language of his world. Instead, He turned his chair slightly, making space beside him rather than behind him. Elena saw it. So did Enzo. So did every captain in the chapel who had spent years believing Dante Romano's authority came from making people smaller. Dante said she would stay where he could protect her and where she could see what was being done in her name, not locked away, not hidden, close enough to decide when her own courage was needed. Elena accepted with a single nod. Dante looked back at the tablet. Then he did something that surprised the entire chapel. He ordered Valentina found alive. A murmur moved through the room. Marco De Luca, Valentina's father, stepped forward immediately, hope and shame fighting across his face. He tried to speak, but Dante raised one hand and silenced him without looking away from the screen. Dante said Valentina had betrayed him publicly. She had aligned herself with his enemy. She had weaponized his disability in front of the whole Mafia world. For that, there would be consequences. But Adrian Volkov did not get to decide those consequences. No rival family would take a woman from Dante Romano's wedding, use her as bait, threaten Elena Marlowe, and walk away with the final word. That was not mercy. It was jurisdiction. And in Dante's world, jurisdiction mattered. By dawn, the Romano estate became a command center. The wedding flowers were stripped from the ballroom. The orchestra balcony became a surveillance platform. The cake table was cleared and replaced with maps, laptops, burner phones, and weapons wrapped in black cloth. Guests who had been trapped by scandal were now separated by usefulness. The Luca elders were interrogated. Volkov envoys were traced. Rocco's captured men were dragged into private rooms and offered the oldest bargain in crime. Truth now or pain later. Most chose truth. Cowards always did once the winning side changed. By 6 a.m, the shape of the real war emerged. Rocco had not been the architect. He had been the gate. The true hand belonged to Adrian Volkov's older sister, Irina Volkov, a woman whose name was rarely spoken in public because men preferred to imagine power as male when it frightened them. Adrian had played the lover beside Valentina, the visible insult, the beautiful villain for the cameras. Rocco had played the internal traitor, the practical old captain ready to inherit a weakened Romano empire. But Irina had built a system beneath them both. She controlled the blackmail channels, the offshore laundering routes, the corrupt medical network that had hidden payments after the car bombing, and the dock workers who moved product under Romano colors. She had waited until Dante's injury made the city question his future, then pushed every weak point at once. The abandoned wedding was supposed to humiliate him. Rocco's coup was supposed to replace him. Valentina's kidnapping was the insurance policy, and Elena's death, if Irina achieved it, would turn the night's only symbol of dignity into a warning against standing beside Dante Romano. Elena listened as Enzo explained the pieces. The more she heard, the clearer her father's death became. Thomas Marlowe had not stumbled onto one betrayal. He had seen the early roots of an empire growing inside another empire. Rocco moving Volkov product through Romano docks. Money passing beneath legitimate shipments. Names hidden in driver schedules. Her father had called the house because loyalty was all he had, and loyalty had put a target on his back. Dante watched Elena absorb it. She did not cry. That worried him more than tears. Grief that could not find a way out often became something sharper inside the body. He told Enzo to bring her father's file to the table. Elena looked at him. Dante said Thomas Marlowe would not remain a footnote in a sealed archive. Not after tonight. Not again. For a moment, Elena could not answer. She had imagined justice many times. In her worst years, justice had looked like money, enough to pay the bills her father's death had left behind. In angrier years, justice had looked like revenge, a faceless person suffering in a way that matched her mother's grief. But now, hearing Dante speak her father's full name in a room where powerful men were forced to listen, she realized justice could also mean restoration. A life returned to its proper weight. A dead man made visible again. At 7 a.m, the first Real lead came from Valentina herself. On the live feed, she moved her hand. Not much, just enough. Her fingers tapped against the chair's wooden arm in a pattern that looked like panic to most people. But one De Luca guard suddenly stepped forward, face pale. He said Valentina had learned old family signal codes as a child, mostly as a game, a way to communicate across rooms during ceremonies when children were expected to stay silent. Enzo rewound the feed. The tapping repeated. 3 short. 2 long. 4 short. A location marker, not words, numbers, a dock section. Pier 324. Dante's eyes narrowed. Pier 324 had been shut down after the bombing. Officially condemned. Structurally unsafe. Forgotten in the legal mess after the blast. It sat near the same stretch of harbor where Thomas Marlowe had vanished years earlier, where Dante's car had exploded 6 months ago, where Rocco had first opened the gate to Volkov. Irina was not hiding randomly. She was making a point. Elena understood it at the same time Dante did. Everything was circling back to the water. The place where her father died. The place where Dante was broken. The place where Irina wanted the final image to be made. Dante ordered the operation immediately, but this time he did not rush blindly toward the bait. He divided the estate into layers. Loyal captains remained to secure the families. The Lucca men were disarmed but allowed to send 2 observers, making them witnesses rather than allies. Federal channel connected to Rocco's case were quietly fed enough information to keep legal pressure moving in the background. Volkov communication nodes were jammed, then opened selectively so Irina would believe some channels still functioned. Elena expected to be told to wait. Dante did not tell her that. He told her the truth instead. Pier 324 would be dangerous. Irina had chosen it for emotional leverage. She wanted Dante angry, distracted, overextended. She wanted Elena present if possible because threats were strongest when performed in front of the person they were meant to break. Then he said Elena had a choice. She could remain at the estate under guard with access to every update, or she could come in the armored command vehicle but stay outside the strike zone. She would not be used as bait. She would not be placed in Irina's hands. And if she came, she would follow extraction orders when given. Elena studied him. This was not the same man who had said, "Not yet," when she told him she was not a prisoner. This was not a man surrendering control completely either. It was something between instinct and change. A dangerous man learning that respect was not the absence of protection, but protection with consent. Elena chose a command vehicle. Dante accepted. No argument. No lecture. At acceptance made her trust him more than any promise could have. By 8, the Romano convoy left the estate. The city was waking into rain. News of the wedding had already begun leaking in distorted fragments. Mafia blogs whispered that Valentina had run away. Financial insiders whispered that Romano captains had been arrested. Anonymous accounts mocked Dante's wheelchair and then deleted their post minutes later after old videos of Rocco's confession began circulating through private networks. Nobody had the whole truth yet, but the underworld did, and the underworld was holding its breath. In the command vehicle, Elena sat across from Dante as monitors showed live feeds from drones moving above the harbor. The vehicle smelled of leather, metal, and coffee nobody had time to drink. Enzo coordinated team threw an A-piece. Valeria, the family lawyer, sat with a laptop open, feeding Rocco's documents into channels that would make sure no single death could bury the evidence again. Dante remained focused on the screens, but Elena noticed a strain in his body. The night had cost him. The impact from catching her. The forced rise in the chapel. The hours without rest. The pain he refused to show. His hands were steady, but his breathing was controlled in the way people breathe when they are managing agony by discipline alone. Elena said he needed a doctor. Dante did not look away from the monitor. He said later. She said men like him always said later until someone had to drag them unconscious into a hospital. His eyes moved to hers. A faint, almost impossible softness touched the edge of his expression. He asked if she was ordering him. Elena said she was observing a bad decision. Enzo, from the front, made the mistake of almost laughing. Dante looked toward him once. Enzo became very interested in the harbor feed. For one small second, the war vehicle felt less like a coffin moving toward violence and more like a room where people might survive long enough to become human again. Then the first drone feed cut out. Enzo straightened. Second feed cut. Third feed flickered, showing Pier 324 through rain and fog. An old warehouse. Broken cranes. Shipping containers stacked like tombs. Water black beneath the dock. Heat signatures inside the building. 8 visible, maybe more shielded by insulation. One seated figure in the center. Valentina. Then the feed went black. Irina knew they were coming. Dante gave the final orders. No hero entry. No open dock approach. Teams would enter through the old drainage tunnel beneath the PO and the collapsed loading ramp on the west side. Snipers would hold the crane line. The command vehicle would remain 2 blocks away. Dante would direct from inside until visual confirmation required forward movement. Elena heard the last part. Until she looked at him. He did not pretend. He said Irina wanted him there. Elena said that did not mean he had to give her what she wanted. Dante looked at the blank screens. Then he said sometimes the only way to end a performance is to walk onto the stage and change the audience. The phrase reminded Elena of what he had said in the chapel. She had changed who was watching. Now he intended to do the same. The operation began silently. No dramatic charge. No shouting. No visible war. Just dark shapes moving through rain. Cutting power. Disabling cameras. Entering old tunnels beneath the dock. The first minutes went perfectly. Too perfectly. Then Valentina's live feed appeared on every screen in the command vehicle. She was crying now, trying to hold herself together and failing. Adrian Volkov stood beside her, bruised, furious, and visibly frightened. That detail mattered. He was not in control either. Then Irina entered the frame. She wore a white suit, untouched by the dirt of the place, her hair pulled back, her expression calm enough to make cruelty look professional. She was not beautiful in the decorative way Valentina was. She was beautiful like a knife placed neatly on a table. She looked directly into the camera. She greeted Dante by name. Then Elena. Elena's spine went cold. Irina smiled slightly, saying the maid looked better alive than she expected. She admitted she had underestimated the value of an invisible woman. People like Elena moved through powerful rooms unseen, hearing secrets, carrying glasses, cleaning blood from marble after men called it business. Irina said perhaps she should have hired more maids and fewer captains. Dante said nothing. Irina continued. She said Rocco was useful but sentimental. Adrian was handsome but vain. Valentina was ambitious but shallow. Men were predictable when pride led them by the throat. But Dante had become unpredictable after the accident. His body changed, and instead of hiding, he adapted. That made him inconvenient. Then she looked toward Elena through the screen, until the maid made him emotional. Elena felt Dante's gaze flicker toward her, but he did not speak. Irina lifted a remote in one hand. Behind Valentina, lights turned on across the warehouse floor. Explosives. Not enough to destroy the entire pier. Enough to kill everyone inside and send the structure into the water. Irina said if Dante's men moved one step closer, Valentina died, Adrian died, and the old pier became another tragic fire in the Romano harbor. The city would mourn nobody, suspect everybody, and fear would do the rest. Dante asked what she wanted. Irina smiled. She wanted him to come alone. Of course she did. But then she added the real cruelty. She wanted Elena brought to the dock entrance. Not inside. Not as a hostage. As a witness. Irina wanted the maid to watch Dante choose between rescuing the woman who humiliated him and protecting the woman who restored him. She wanted to turn dignity into another performance. Elena understood the trap immediately. If Dante refused, Valentina died and the De Luca family fractured into blood revenge. If Dante entered, Irina could kill him on the stage he had built from his trauma. If Elena came, the threat against her became real again. Dante turned off the audio for 1 second. He looked at Enzo and gave several quiet orders. Enzo listened, eyes hardening. A secondary team would flood the drainage tunnel, not with water, but with smoke from beneath the floor vents. Valeria would push Rocco's confession to the Luca elders immediately, proving Valentina had been used and that Irina, not Dante, held her. Snipers would target explosive triggers but not shoot until Dante's signal. The command vehicle would move closer under blackout. Then Dante turned to Elena. He said she did not have to come any closer. Elena looked at the screen, at Valentina shaking in the chair, at Irina smiling with the confidence of a woman who believed she could choreograph other people's fear. Then she looked at Dante. She said Irina wanted a witness. Dante said yes. Elena said then they should give her one she could not control. Dante's face tightened. He did not like it, but he listened. Elena said her entire life had been shaped by men who thought witnesses without power did not matter. Her father saw something and died. Her mother knew something and was ignored. Elena served rooms full of criminals who spoke freely because they believed a maid was not a person the story would remember. Tonight, that ended. She would stand outside the dock, not as bait, not as property, as Thomas Marlowe's daughter, as a woman Rocco failed to erase, as a witness Elena would regret inviting. Dante was silent for a long moment. Then he said if the situation changed, she would obey extraction. Elena said if the situation changed, he would not confuse sacrifice with strategy. A faint, grim acknowledgement passed between them. Agreement, not comfort, but trust under fire. At Pier 324, rain fell harder. Dante moved toward the warehouse entrance alone, his wheelchair rolling across wet concrete, black coat moving in the wind. From a distance, under the broken harbor lights, he looked like a shadow refusing to be swallowed. Elena stood 20 yards behind him beside the command vehicle, guarded but visible, her bruised face lifted toward the warehouse camera mounted above the door. Elena would see her. That was the point. Dante entered the warehouse. Inside, the air smelled of salt, oil, old rust, and betrayal. Valentina looked up when she saw him. Shame moved across her face so violently that for 1 second she could not speak. Adrian stood behind her, one eye swollen, hands bound in front of him now. He looked furious at being reduced to bait in his sister's operation. Elena waited near the center of the warehouse, remote in hand, 2 guards beside her. She looked at Dante's chair, then at his face. Unlike Rocco, she did not mock the wheelchair immediately. That made her more dangerous. She said he had adapted well. Dante said she had hidden well. Elena accepted the compliment. Then she told him the city was changing. Old families were too sentimental, too theatrical, too attached to names and rituals. She wanted a cleaner empire. Data, ports, medical networks, political leverage, digital blackmail. No unnecessary codes. No loyalty myths. No outdated masculinity pretending to be honor. Dante looked at the explosives, then at Valentina. He said if she believed that, the wedding insult had been unnecessary. Elena's smile thinned. Dante had touched the truth. For all her talk of modern power, Elena had still used humiliation because humiliation was ancient, addictive, and effective. She had mocked his body because she believed the old cruelty would still move old men. She had used Valentina's beauty, Adrian's vanity, Rocco's resentment, and Elena's visibility because symbols still mattered. Elena said symbols were tools. Dante replied that tools could cut the hand holding them. Outside, Elena stood in the rain and watched through the tactical feed Enzo had routed to a small monitor. She could hear only fragments, but she saw the positions. Dante in the center, Elena near the detonator, Valentina tied, Adrian tense, guards alert. Then she saw movement behind the far containers. Dante's team had entered. Smoke began to seep through the floor vents. Elena noticed a second too late. Her head turned. Dante moved first. Not toward her, toward Valentina. Elena lifted the remote. A sniper round shattered the antenna module beside her thumb. The remote sparked. At the same time, smoke erupted beneath the guard's feet. Enzo's team breached from the drainage tunnel. Gunfire cracked across the warehouse, controlled and fast. One guard fell. Another fired blindly into smoke. Adrian ducked behind Valentina's chair, shouting that he was not part of this anymore. Elena did not panic. She pulled a secondary trigger from her sleeve. Dante saw it. Too far. Wrong angle. No clean shot. Outside, Elena saw it too on the monitor. A small black switch in Elena's hand. The backup. Elena looked toward the warehouse door. Every guard beside her shouted for her to stay back. She ran, not into the main hall blindly, not into gunfire without thought. She ran to the side entry where old dock offices connected to the warehouse floor. She had seen the map. She had listened. She knew the office corridor passed behind Elena's position. Her whole life, people assumed service workers did not remember layouts. They were wrong. Elena entered through the side office, slipping on wet concrete, heart hammering, lungs burning. Smoke curled through broken glass panels. She heard gunfire, shouting, Dante's voice giving orders. She kept low, moving past rusted desks and old filing cabinets until she reached the narrow doorway behind the central floor. Elena stood 10 feet away, focused on Dante. The backup trigger was in her hand. Elena picked up the nearest object from the office floor. A heavy metal dock stamp. She threw it with every bit of strength she had. It struck Elena's wrist. The trigger flew from her hand and skidded across the floor. Elena turned, shocked. Elena stepped out of the smoke. For 1 second, every part of the war seemed to pause. The Mafia strategists who thought maids were tools. The maid who refused to remain invisible. Elena's expression twisted with genuine anger for the first time. She lunged toward the trigger. Elena lunged too. They collided hard against the concrete. Elena was trained better, stronger in a colder way, and she drove her elbow into Elena's ribs, knocking the air from her lungs. Elena grabbed her sleeve, refusing to let go. Elena reached the trigger with her fingertips. Then Dante's chair slammed into the trigger first. The wheels crushed it beneath reinforced metal. Elena looked up. Dante was there, gun trained on her, smoke moving behind him like a storm. Elena was on the floor, coughing, but smiling through pain because for once, a witness had not died alone with the truth. Elena tried to speak. Dante fired once. Not to kill, to disarm. The bullet struck the concrete beside her hand close enough to make her freeze. Enzo and 2 guards seized her before she could move again. Across the warehouse, Valentina was freed by a DeLuca guard who looked ready to collapse from relief and shame. Adrian was dragged to his knees, shouting that Elena had forced him, that he had not known the full plan, that Valentina had come willingly at first, but the kidnapping was not his idea. No one cared. The explosives were disarmed within minutes. The warehouse secured. The pier remained standing. But Dante did not leave immediately. He rolled to the center of Pier 324, where the broken roof let rain fall through in thin silver lines. This was where his life had split 6 months earlier. Near this dock, his car had burned, his body had broken, and his enemies had begun preparing to inherit him. Elena came to stand beside him, one arm pressed against her bruised ribs. He looked at her, anger flashing because she had run into danger after promising not to be used as bait. She lifted one hand before he could speak. She said she was not bait. She was the interruption. Dante stared at her. Then, against the ruin of the warehouse, the rain, the captured enemies, and the ghosts of everything that had happened near the water, he laughed once. Not loudly, not happily, but real. A sound so unexpected that Enzo looked over as if he had heard a gun misfire. Elena almost smiled. Almost. Then Valentina approached. Her red dress was torn. Her makeup had streaked down her cheeks. The arrogance that had carried her through the wedding video was gone, replaced by exhaustion and fear. She stopped several feet from Dante, unable to meet his eyes for long. She apologized. The words came out small. Dante looked at her. There had been a time, even earlier that night, when humiliation might have demanded blood. But after Rocco's confession, Elena's fall, Elena's courage, and the truth about Thomas Marlowe, Valentina's cruelty looked less like power and more like weakness dressed in silk. He asked whether she knew about the bombing. She said no. He asked whether she knew about Rocco's coup. She hesitated. That hesitation answered. She admitted she knew Dante's position would be weakened after the video. She knew DeLuca and Volkov pressure would force a shift. She thought it would be political. She thought Dante would step down, perhaps leave the city, perhaps become a silent shareholder in the empire he once ruled. She said she did not know Elena planned to kill people at the estate. She did not know Elena would be targeted. She did not know she herself would become bait. Dante listened without expression. Then he said ignorance of the full cruelty did not erase participation in the first cruelty. Valentina lowered her head. Her punishment was not death. That would make her a martyr for people who liked beauty more than truth. Dante chose something colder. Public consequence. The DeLuca alliance was dissolved. Their family would repay every dollar connected to the failed marriage contract. Valentina would give testimony through family channels confirming Volkov manipulation and Rocco's conspiracy. She would be sent out of New York under DeLuca's supervision, stripped of political marriage value for every family that respected Romano judgment. No wedding, no throne, no glamorous betrayal, just survival with shame attached. Valentina accepted it because she had no other choice. But before she was taken away, she looked at Elena. For a moment, the 2 women stood inside the wreckage of a war men had arranged around their images, the bride who was supposed to humiliate, and the maid who had refused to let humiliation win. Valentina said she did not understand why Elena had saved her. Elena answered honestly. She said she had not done it for Valentina. She had done it because Elena did not get to decide who deserved to live. Dante heard the answer. and understood Elena more deeply than before. She was not soft. People would mistake her for soft because she did not crave blood. But mercy, when chosen freely in a room full of violence, required a strength most killers never learned. By noon, Irina Volkov was in Romano custody, but not hidden. Dante had learned from Rocco's case that secrets fed rot. So Irina's financial archive was cracked, copied, and distributed through enough channels that her network began collapsing before sunset. Offshore accounts froze. Blackmail victims turned evidence over in exchange of protection. Volkov captains denied her, then betrayed each other. Adrian was traded as a witness and hostage in everything but name, kept alive long enough to dismantle what his vanity had helped protect. The Volkov empire did not explode. It imploded. That was Dante's preferred ending. Explosions made legends. Implosions made warnings. Rocco's case became unavoidable. Thomas Marlowe's death was reopened officially after 8 years. At acceptance made her trust him more than any promise could have. By 8, the Romano convoy left the estate. The city was waking into rain. News of the wedding had already begun leaking in distorted fragments. Mafia blogs whispered that Valentina had run away. Financial insiders whispered that Romano captains had been arrested. Anonymous accounts mocked Dante's wheelchair and then deleted their post minutes later after old videos of Rocco's confession began circulating through private networks. Nobody had the whole truth yet, but the underworld did, and the underworld was holding its breath. In the command vehicle, Elena sat across from Dante as monitors showed live feeds from drones moving above the harbor. The vehicle smelled of leather, metal, and coffee nobody had time to drink. Enzo coordinated team threw an A-piece. Valeria, the family lawyer, sat with a laptop open, feeding Rocco's documents into channels that would make sure no single death could bury the evidence again. Dante remained focused on the screens, but Elena noticed a strain in his body. The night had cost him. The impact from catching her, the forced rise in the chapel, the hours without rest, the pain he refused to show. His hands were steady, but his breathing was controlled in the way people breathe when they are managing agony by discipline alone. Elena said he needed a doctor. Dante did not look away from the monitor. He said later. She said men like him always said later until someone had to drag them unconscious into a hospital. His eyes moved to hers. A faint, almost impossible softness touched the edge of his expression. He asked if she was ordering him. Elena said she was observing a bad decision. Enzo, from the front, made the mistake of almost laughing. Dante looked toward him once. Enzo became very interested in the harbor feed. For one small second, the war vehicle felt less like a coffin moving toward violence and more like a room where people might survive long enough to become human again. Then the first drone feed cut out. Enzo straightened. Second feed cut. Third feed flickered, showing Pier 324 through rain and fog. An old warehouse. Broken cranes. Shipping containers stacked like tombs. Water black beneath the dock. Heat signatures inside the building. 8 visible, maybe more shielded by insulation. One seated figure in the center. Valentina. Then the feed went black. Irina knew they were coming. Dante gave the final orders. No hero entry. No open dock approach. Teams would enter through the old drainage tunnel beneath the PO and the collapsed loading ramp on the west side. Snipers would hold the crane line. The command vehicle would remain 2 blocks away. Dante would direct from inside until visual confirmation required forward movement. Elena heard the last part. Until she looked at him. He did not pretend. He said Irina wanted him there. Elena said that did not mean he had to give her what she wanted. Dante looked at the blank screens. Then he said sometimes the only way to end a performance is to walk onto the stage and change the audience. The phrase reminded Elena of what he had said in the chapel. She had changed who was watching. Now he intended to do the same. The operation began silently. No dramatic charge. No shouting. No visible war. Just dark shapes moving through rain. Cutting power. Disabling cameras. Entering old tunnels beneath the dock. The first minutes went perfectly. Too perfectly. Then Valentina's live feed appeared on every screen in the command vehicle. She was crying now, trying to hold herself together and failing. Adrian Volkov stood beside her, bruised, furious, and visibly frightened. That detail mattered. He was not in control either. Then Irina entered the frame. She wore a white suit, untouched by the dirt of the place. her hair pulled back, her expression calm enough to make cruelty look professional. She was not beautiful in the decorative way Valentina was. She was beautiful like a knife placed neatly on a table. She looked directly into the camera. She greeted Dante by name. Then Elena. Elena's spine went cold. Irina smiled slightly, saying the maid looked better alive than she expected. She admitted she had underestimated the value of an invisible woman. People like Elena moved through powerful rooms unseen, hearing secrets, carrying glasses, cleaning blood from marble after men called it business. Irina said perhaps she should have hired more maids and fewer captains. Dante said nothing. Irina continued. She said Rocco was useful but sentimental. Adrian was handsome but vain. Valentina was ambitious but shallow. Men were predictable when pride led them by the throat. But Dante had become unpredictable after the accident. His body changed, and instead of hiding, he adapted. That made him inconvenient. Then she looked toward Elena through the screen, until the maid made him emotional. Elena felt Dante's gaze flicker toward her, but he did not speak. Irina lifted a remote in one hand. Behind Valentina, lights turned on across the warehouse floor. Explosives, not enough to destroy the entire pier, enough to kill everyone inside and send the structure into the water. Irina said if Dante's men moved one step closer, Valentina died, Adrian died, and the old pier became another tragic fire in the Romano harbor. The city would mourn nobody, suspect everybody, and fear would do the rest. Elena asked if he regretted it. He answered honestly. He regretted letting Rocco make him believe, even for a second, that standing would prove anything. Elena smiled faintly. Dante looked back at her. She said he did prove something. His expression tightened, guarded. She said he proved he was still carrying old wounds other people had named for him. Dante absorbed that slowly. It was not praise. It was more intimate than praise. It was recognition. He said the world was easier when enemies were outside the walls. Elena said yes. Then she said the cruelest ones usually taught us to hate parts of ourselves before they ever fired. Dante looked at her for a long time. That was the moment he realized Elena had not simply given him dignity at the wedding. She had seen the exact place where humiliation tried to enter him, and had stood in front of it with one hand outstretched. Not because he was a boss, because he was a man. He asked why she really did it. The dance. Elena looked toward the garden, remembering the chandeliers, the silence, the hungry eyes, Valentina's video, the entire room waiting for Dante to become smaller. She said because she knew what it felt like to have people watch your worst moment and do nothing. Dante's face changed. No one had ever answered him like that. Not with flattery, not with fear, with shared damage. Elena turned back to him. She said she did not know him that night. She did not know whether he was good or cruel or deserving of kindness. She only knew that the room had become ugly, and someone had to interrupt it. Dante's voice lowered. He asked if she regretted it. Elena thought of her bruises, the gunfire, the apartment break-in, the truth about her father, the terrifying speed with which her invisible life had become central to a war. Then she thought of Thomas Marlowe's corrected record, of Dante's apology, of the way he waited now instead of ordering. No, she said. She did not regret it. Dante looked down briefly, as if something inside him needed a moment to survive the answer. Then he said he wanted to ask her something, but not as a boss. Elena's pulse shifted. He continued carefully, each word chosen with the discipline of a man approaching something more dangerous than negotiations. He asked if she would have dinner with him. Not at the estate. Not in a room full of armed men. Not as repayment. Not as protection. Only if she wanted. Elena studied him. There was a time when Dante Romano could make cities move with a phone call, but now he sat before Maid's door to asking permission for a meal like the answer mattered more than pride. That mattered to her. She said yes. Then she added that she would choose a restaurant. Dante nodded. She said no private rooms. He nodded again. She said no men standing 3 feet away pretending not to listen. Dante hesitated. Elena raised an eyebrow. He said 6 feet. She said outside. A pause. Then Dante agreed. Their first dinner was not cinematic. That was what made it real. The restaurant was small, family-owned, and too bright for a Mafia boss accustomed to shadowed rooms. Dante's chair barely fit between the tables. Elena had to ask a waiter to move 2 chairs, and for the first time in a long time, Dante sat in a public place where nobody had prepared the world around him in advance. Some people stared. Elena saw his jaw tighten. She did not rescue him from it. She only continued reading the menu and asked whether he always looked at pasta like it had betrayed him. Dante stared at her. Then, very slowly, he smiled. A real one this time. Brief, dangerous, almost reluctant. Elena decided it suited him badly and beautifully. They did not fall in love that night. Love, for people like them, did not arrive as music swelling after violence. It arrived slowly, suspiciously, with conditions checked and exits left open. It arrived in repeated choices. Dante choosing not to send cars without asking. Elena choosing to answer his calls. Dante choosing to tell her when pain was bad instead of disappearing behind anger. Elena choosing to sit beside him on difficult days without turning him into a project. He learned to let her open doors when she wanted and reject help when she did not need it. She learned that his silence did not always mean distance. Sometimes it meant he was trusting her enough not to perform control. He learned that disability did not require proving strength through suffering. She learned that power did not always corrupt tenderness, but tenderness had to be defended from power every day. A year after the wedding that never became a marriage, the Romano family hosted another event in the same ballroom. Not a wedding, a foundation gala in Thomas Marlowe's name, funding legal aid, worker protections, and emergency support for families of employees killed or injured because they stood too close to powerful men's secrets. The guest list included politicians, judges, businessmen, captains, widows, drivers, nurses, and kitchen staff. People whispered that it was image repair. Maybe it was. But when Elena stood at the podium and spoke her father's name, her voice did not shake. She told the room that invisible people were not silent by nature. They were silenced by design. She said her father died because he believed loyalty meant speaking when silence was safer. She said the foundation existed so that the next driver, maid, clerk, or nurse who saw something dangerous would not have to choose between truth and leaving their family alone. Dante watched from the front. The ballroom remembered them. The chandeliers, the aisle, the dance. Elena finished her speech to a standing ovation that began not with the crime families or politicians, but with the staff lined along the back wall. Dante noticed. Elena noticed too. Later that night, after the guests had eaten, after the cameras had gone, after the speeches turned into softer conversations, the orchestra began playing. The same piece from the wedding night. Elena recognized it immediately. So did Dante. He looked at her from beside the dance floor, not commanding, not assuming, waiting. A year ago, she had crossed this floor in a black uniform and asked a humiliated man whether he would dance. Now she wore a dark blue dress, her father's pocket watch on a chain around her wrist, and walked toward him without fear. Dante looked up at her. Elena held out her hand. Again. But this time, the room did not laugh. This time, no bride had abandoned him. This time, no enemy controlled the cameras. This time, when Elena asked if he would dance, everyone understood that the question did not save his dignity. It honored what had survived. Dante took her hand. The chair moved smoothly onto the floor. Elena stepped with him, the music folding around them. The dance was slow, precise, intimate without spectacle. People watched. Yes, but their watching had changed. No hunger for humiliation. No cruel curiosity. Only the uneasy over room seeing two people rewrite the meaning of an old wound in front of them. Halfway through the dance, Dante pulled Elena slightly closer. He said there was something he had never told her. Elena looked down at him. He said on the night she first asked him to dance, he thought she had saved his image. Then he looked around the ballroom, at the staff standing proud, at Enzo watching with rare softness, at the captains who had learned respect could be more dangerous than fear, at the place where Valentina's betrayal had once played on every phone. His eyes returned to Elena. He said he had been wrong. She had not saved his image. She had saved him from believing his enemy's version of him. Elena's throat tightened. She squeezed his hand. Then she said he had done the same for her father. Dante shook his head. No, he said. Thomas Marlowe had done that himself. They only made the city hear it. The music continued. For once, no gunfire interrupted it. No black envelope fell. No screen lit with threats. There was only the sound of a room breathing differently than it had a year before. Later, When people told the story, they always began with a scandal. At his own wedding, the paraplegic mafia boss was abandoned. The bride ran away. The rivals laughed. The empire waited for him to break. Then a maid stepped forward and asked, "Shall we dance?" But people who knew the whole truth told it differently. They said the dance was not romance at first. It was rebellion. It was one invisible person refusing to let cruelty have the final image. It was a wounded king learning that dignity did not live in legs, posture, fear, or the approval of men waiting to inherit him. It was the beginning of justice for a dead driver, the fall of a traitor, the collapse of a rival empire, and the first moment Dante Romano understood that being seen by the right person could be more dangerous than being feared by the whole city. And years later, when Elena Marlowe became the woman no captain dared ignore, when Dante ruled from his chair without apology, when Thomas Marlowe's name stood carved in stone above a foundation that protected the invisible, people still asked whether the maid had known what she was starting when she crossed that ballroom. Elena always gave the same answer. She said no. She had not known about Rocco. She had not known about Volkov. She had not known about the bombing, the doc files, the old murder, or the war hidden beneath the wedding flowers. She had only seen a room full of people waiting for one man to be humiliated, and she decided they would have to watch him dance instead. So tell me, was Elena foolish for stepping forward that night? Or was she the only brave person in the room?